Okay, we are back with Brian Howell. Once again, he is the founder of Crestview.io. This is a platform that helps leaders identify, assess, and visualize risk. We are here talking about risk management, risk governance, many issues, internal controls, and in this video, we are going to circle in on cybersecurity. So I would love to hear some of your insights and some of the things you're seeing. And I think we'll just start there. Brian, thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this so far.
Right on. So let's just start there with cyber and technology risk. Why do you think these remain so hard for boards and executives to fully grasp?
Yeah, I think there's probably several reasons for that. One is that cyber risks are extremely complex on their own, much less when viewed probably much more when viewed in context to the overall business. Additionally, there's internal and external threats to be managed that are challenging if they were in a stable and mature environment. But as we know, the technology environment is rapidly changing. And so I think that's becoming a bigger challenge along the way. So imagine if AI tools will enable businesses to become more efficient, the level of sophistication imagine the level of sophistication and access that will bring to threat actors trying to look for access into organizations or into supply chains. Many of the breaches we've seen over the years have not necessarily gone for the big fish. They've gone for smaller organizations within the supply chain and worked themselves through to get a larger target, if you will. And so I think that's part of the challenge. And then finally, I think having the margin, we talked about margin of time earlier in our conversation, having the margin of time to work through it. And at a board level, that can be hard because there's a lot of other topics that are important as well. And so being able to have that conversation along the way, I think can be challenging just from margin of time perspective.
Sure. And can be difficult in a situation where you're talking about things that may be a little bit abstract. For example, if you've not been hit with a cyber attack, it can be a little difficult to understand what that's like to walk through, right? And how do you get that message across to an executive that it's never happened to? It is terrible to go through.
Yeah, and at that point, it's complete crisis management.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it's not a technical issue. While it is a technical issue, all the pieces of your organization need to be ready and come together, from communications to operations to what do we, if we've sidelined an entire group of employees, depending on the size of the organization, how do we communicate that? What are the plans? Whatever does that look like? So there's a lot of pieces that go into advanced planning. Tabletop exercises to be able to work through what does this look like and what are the components that we need to be thinking about along the way.
Very good. And so let's pick up on that. Then when we think about planning for things like this to happen, we know about frameworks like COSO, COBIT, NIST. What role should those things be playing, and where do they actually kind of fall short in real world application?
Yeah. I think they are all frameworks, and ultimately frameworks are tools. And so, I think using those tools is the role that they should play, right? The leaders using those frameworks and tools. I don't know that they fall short, right? I mean, maybe in the context of, NIST gets updated from time to time. There's a new view of COSO that has come out around governing AI and things like this, right? So I think maturity along the way is always going to be a activity for these organizations to keep up. But ultimately, the gap is that they can't do it for you, right? it still needs leaders to identify, assess, and mitigate risk within the business process. And again, we go back to that conversation of, do we spend time identifying, mitigating risk, or do we go and sell a new customer? And the answer is both, right? And so then comes back to the margin of time and the focus of what are we doing and how are we staffed to be able to accomplish both.
Indeed. Yeah. So very good insight there. And there's going to be a fair amount of our listeners that are either students or they're business leaders. And once again, we talked a little bit about, step one and step two. You kind of had an approach that you laid out for us in the last video about going forward with or ERM if we don't have that in our business. And so when we think about strategizing, what does good ERM look like for a company that may not be an SEC company, may not be a big company, but maybe a mid-sized company or a privately held organization without a very large risk team? What's that look like to you?
Yeah. I think we really haven't talked about risk appetite, but if you think about what are the risks in your business and what are we willing to take on, if something were to happen, would we be able to navigate that risk to the business coming to fruition, right? So if you had a cyber risk come, a cyber attack happen to your organization, would you be able to recover in such a way and time frame that you could stand your business back up and operate? So somebody locks down your data and they say, hey, we will destroy the data unless you provide this sort of capital through um, as a ransom, then the question is, are you prepared and capable of actually paying that ransom if you made the decision that you were going to do that? And so ultimately, if you know what the risks are, you're going to be in a better position to make a decision. Can we face that risk? Can we take that risk as a business? So I always make the suggestion that just because you can be in a technology, and again, we're talking technology here, so I'll leave it in technology place, but just because you can use a technology doesn't mean you should. I think I would back it up and say, hey, how does this support our business process? How is this going to make us better? And not only does it make us better, but how does it point back to the organizational goals? And how does it help us meet those organizational goals? And so if you take it into that context, you can start to say, well, hey, that's a risk we're not willing to take. And that by conversation is enterprise risk management.
Yeah, very good. And thinking about almost cost benefit, right? Like how much is this going to cost us, including how much risk we're going to expose ourselves to versus how much
That's
is it
right.
going to benefit our business, right?
That's right. So credit cards are a perfect example of it. There's a fantastic, fun little place here in Wichita called the Grinder Man. They don't take credit cards. They're cash only. And so, in the context of their business, with the fees and the risk per se to that business that comes with them taking credit cards, the question becomes, why do they want to do that? And to your point, cost benefit analysis. Is there a benefit to them to offer to their customer the ability to pay with a credit card? And their choice, at least up as of this taping, right, has been no, right? They take cash, and that's what it is, and that's okay. And they are missing out on business because there's times I'll drive by there and I'm like, I don't have cash on me, and I might like a Grinder Man sandwich. So the question is, do I run up to the bank up the street, grab some cash at the ATM, run back?
Right on. So, Brian, as we wrap up our time together, give me some thoughts that to leave our students and our business professionals with here. What would you like them to walk away with from listening to us here today?
Yeah, for sure. And Jason, thanks again for having me. It's been a great conversation. I think ultimately all business leaders, all of us have an important decision to make to focus on a controlled environment, or do we chase compliance? So a well-governed and controlled environment should yield a compliant environment that addresses contractual, regulatory, and key challenges like cyber risk, like we've talked about. But that doesn't necessarily go the opposite way. So a chasing compliance doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a well-governed, controlled environment. Finally, the topics around enterprise risk management, internal controls, internal audit can be overwhelming and may feel secondary when you're in the middle of a busy month end. However, let me encourage all of us to be leading in a way that keeps these conversations alive and productive in a way that advances internal control for improving business outcomes and preventing fraud, right? So if you go back to the original COSO definition that we talked about earlier, I think getting back to that as the outcomes, I think will serve our businesses well and our business environments well. And then lastly, I would just say if there's anything I can help in that conversation for you, I'd be glad to connect. Certainly would love to have a conversation with you.
Okay. Brian, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insights today.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
All right.